Hello, welcome to The Verdict, a podcast by the Carlson law firm. And in this series, we talk all about car collisions, the injuries that happen because of them, and the surrounding topics. And in this episode, I'm talking about drugged, impaired driving, and distracted driving. I'm your host, Jeffrey Hinson, and I'm joined today by Jamie Lynn and Steve Dummitt. Now, people may not know both of you, so I wanted to go and let y'all have a little introduction to yourselves. Jamie?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Jamie Lynn. I'm a partner in the Carlson law firm Round Rock office. I've been with the firm for 9 years, I think. Prior to that time, I ran my own office for about 9 years. I worked for two other plaintiffs' firms, and then I was an assistant attorney general for a couple of years here with the state. And my office primarily focuses on, as you described, automobile collisions, on the job injuries, wrongful deaths, things of that nature. So,
Thanks for being on today. Yeah. Steve?
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me as well. I'm glad to be here. So Steve Dummitt, I'm a partner here in San Antonio. We have two offices in San Antonio, and I go back and forth between the two. Like Jamie said, my offices do the same thing. So a lot of auto collisions, a lot of on-the-job injuries, call them premise cases where people got hurt on somebody else's property or somebody else's work site at a home they're building. I've been with the Carlson law firm for coming up on 9 years straight, unlike Jamie Lynn. But yeah, just right out of I think I started working at the Carlson law firm the week before I got my bar results in October of 2012. So it's the only firm I've ever worked for, and it's really crazy to say that, but it's been a good place to work at.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Steve, also for joining us today for this episode. Yeah. So, like I mentioned, episode is all about drug driving, impaired driving, drunk driving, and distracted driving. And I wanted to cover this topic because, for the most part, collisions dealing with these situations can be most likely fatal. And I wanted to provide a resource on what the process can be after the collision. So I wanted to start with you, Jamie, with the first question, and that is, how do I deal with a drunk driver after a collision? Like, for instance, how do I approach the other driver if I think they're intoxicated?
Well, let me start out by giving you a couple of numbers here on DWIs. You have driving under the influence, which is inclusive of drunk driving under the influence of alcohol, but that could also include drug impairment and other substances. But just last year, in drunk driving cases alone, there were 5,958 people injured due to DWI crashes. There were 14,178,000 total crashes, and of those, 958 people were killed due to that. 25% of all the crashes that happen in the state of Texas are due to DWI. And most of those happen between 2 in the morning and 2:59 in the morning on Saturdays. Those are the most common times that they occur. If you are in a automobile collision involving a drunk driver, you probably want to be a little bit cautious because they're not as inclined, because of the limitations in their abilities that's caused by the alcohol. You don't really know how they're going to react, but you still need to be proactive in getting all the information you have. Sometimes they try to flee. And that could either be in the vehicle if it's drivable. Sometimes they just run off. But be sure to get your camera out, film them if you can, record slurring of speech, bad gait, things like that. Anything that would give anybody an indication that they were intoxicated, because sometimes police officers don't always arrest them for DWI. And you want to be able to establish that this person was still under the influence, and you want to be able to have the evidence to show that. Take photographs of the vehicle damage, both your car and the other vehicle. Get the guy's driver's license and his insurance information. Contact the police. Do not let them try to talk you out of letting them go or something like that. Get a police officer out there on the scene and let them know you think that they've been drinking. If you don't want to get up too much where it could cause a confrontation between the guy. But if you happen to be able to see inside his vehicle and see whether he's got empty beer cans or an open drink there, photograph it. The more information that you have, the better, because these types of cases put all of us at risk, and they need to be addressed appropriately. And the insurance companies need to know that they need to take responsibility for the people that they are insuring, and make sure that they are doing it in such a way that it helps protect all of the citizens of Texas.
Yeah. Because I sort of wanted to bounce that to Steve. I didn't know if there was anything you would like to add to that. And also, I want to ask, when it comes to these collisions with drunk driving DWIs, how would insurance company react to that? What is the process more difficult in these situations? Is it easier because there's more of a drunk person behind the wheel?
Yeah, I just want to echo Jamie's comments. So a lot of the times when folks are drunk, they try to convince the person they hit, the victim, hey, let's not call the cops. Nobody needs to get in trouble. Here's my information. We'll deal with this later. It's late. And they start making up excuses, right? Oh, I got to run home to my kids. I got to do this. I got to do that. The biggest thing is definitely call 911 and tell the operator on the phone right there to say, hey, I suspect this guy is drunk. He's wobbly. I saw him throwing beer cans over somebody's fence around the corner. Tell them that, and they will tell that to the police, and the police will do that part of their investigation. But it is, unfortunately, in bigger cities, especially here in San Antonio, people drink all the time, and a lot of times they get away with it after they cause a crash. Police officers might note, like, oh yeah, there was a witness saying this guy threw all his beer over, it was thrown into the city bus stop trash can or over that fence, but I didn't really suspect anything, and no harm, no foul. And by the way, yeah, and by the way, they're all, this is, and they'll tell the victim, like, oh, we'll just hire an attorney. Literally, they'll tell them, hire an attorney. Yeah. This will be a civil matter. Y'all figure it out. And so if that's the case, fine. There might not be an arrest. There might not be a conviction, but we have a different burden of proof on the civil side. We have a much lower burden of proof to prove negligence and also gross negligence, which is a little bit higher standard. What I'm trying to say is, when we go after monetary damages, we don't have to prove that this guy was drunk because he blew a 0.12 on the breathalyzer and because he failed all the sobriety tests. We don't have to prove that. We have a much lower burden of proof. And so, looping back to your question about what the insurance companies do, they're scared. So either A, they pay a lot easier, usually, as long as you have some evidence. Two, they also look for ways to get out by excluding coverage. And what that means is they look for a reason to say, hey, there is no coverage under this crash because this guy was in the, so they'll say, like, he was in the commission of a felony. So I don't want to get too much legal jargon. Commission of a felony basically means he was he was committing not just a misdemeanor, a felony. Therefore, here's a little exclusion. We're out. Or what's very common is, hey, this driver's not on the policy. His neighbor is, or the passenger was, because the driver was drunk and the passenger was passed out, and that's why he's driving the passenger home at 3 a.m. So he's not on the policy. We're out. So they try to get out of it, but in general, yes, when a DWI case comes in the door and there is actually insurance, the insurance companies tend to pay a higher value because of that risk of going to trial and having a very, very large verdict put against their insured. So, sorry, Jamie, I know you were getting ready to say something earlier.
No, actually, I just wanted to touch on something you actually mentioned. Is talking about witnesses. if there is a witness there at the scene, get their information, because even when they talk to police officers, sometimes the police officer does not get their information down, and you may need that witness later on. It is always important to get all of that information if you can, because I've got 2 cases right now involving DWIs where there were witnesses that the police officers spoke to, but they did not get their information recorded. And we have no way of communicating with them and getting the evidence that they could otherwise provide that would assist the injured person.
That's the most surprising thing to me, hearing both of y'all, because hearing you, Jamie, how like police officers don't really get information off witnesses, and then Steve, how you mentioned how insurance companies, they might pay a higher value, but then they try to skirt around, oh, this person wasn't really a part of the insurance and things of that nature. It's really surprising how when it comes to DWIs and drunk driving, that things get skirted to the side a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, look, insurance companies, when they're told about a crash, step one is, how can we get out of this? Right.
Yeah.
So if it's, oh, we can't, it's actually our own insured, then step two, how can we deny this? How can we, defend this? How can we, craft a story where we can point the finger at the person that our guy rear-ended at a stop sign, right? So and that's just the reality, and that's just all the more reason when people come to us like, oh yeah, I got the easiest case in the world, I got rear-ended. No, because they can all of a sudden just make something up and say, oh, it was unavoidable. Everybody, it was rainy, it was unavoidable. Or sudden emergency. That's a good one too. Sudden emergency that the stoplight turned red, so everybody had to stop all of a sudden. We're out. So again, with the drunk, there definitely is a lot more of a risk to these insurance companies. But all the more reason though that how they look to get out of these cases. And it sounds so bizarre, but I cannot echo Jamie's comments enough and say, so many times clients say, oh, well, the police officer, he got all that information, he spoke to that person for 5-10 minutes, they told me, they gave him a statement. That person's information is nowhere. We can do an open records request, we subpoena the information, we depose the officer. Oh yeah, I spoke to somebody, but it's just all part of my investigation. I don't need, I didn't need to write down their names. And by the way, there's not even a place on the police report to specifically write in the witnesses' information. So they're like, I didn't need that for my report. So it's a lot more surprising. And that's why, step one, you always have to protect yourself and start to create that record. And it starts with when you call the 911 dispatchers, gather the evidence. But unfortunately, when people are really injured, right, it's huge, serious crash, right? T-bone, they're knocked out or they're delirious at the scene. That's the last thing they're thinking about is, hey, let's go prove up my case. They can't do that. They are relying on the public to do their job, especially the police department, and they're just not in that position to do so. It's also very common for folks, they don't even know what happened. They don't even know what the color of the vehicle was that hit them or the type of vehicle, because they get whisked away immediately by ambulance to the hospital. So those are also tough cases. They can be tough cases because they have no evidence of what's going on. So,
yeah, Jamie, I wanted to bring this question to you because Steve had just mentioned how with clients there might be some difficulty. They might get whisked away when they in the ambulance. They might not know the color of vehicles and stuff. I wanted to ask deeper, like, is there a difference, and what is the difference between handling a case with a DWI versus just, I would say, like a normal mom and pop crash on the street?
Sure, and that's a good question. The distinctions are great. You have, first of all, let's say that the drunk driver was arrested and is being prosecuted. There will be dash cam footage, there will be body cam footage, there will be a lot of other information in there. However, the state of Texas has determined and decided that during the course of the investigation, until that guy is either pled out or convicted or his case is dropped, you can't get that information. You can subpoena it. They don't have to turn it over. And the Attorney General of the state of Texas has issued numerous opinions to that effect. And so one of the greatest difficulties that we run into is getting all of the evidence that we need within a reasonable amount of time so that we can properly and actively pursue the claim to get the full extent of damages that ought to be paid on this. Because like I say, dash cam footage, video footage is just invaluable. That's why if you're not incapacitated from the crash, if you can get out and actually film any of that, do it. Because you may not be able to, and even as attorneys, we may not be able to get that information as readily as we wanted. I had a case a couple of years ago where a guy hit two of my elderly clients head on. Both of them were in the hospital for over a month each, and then the husband had to be in a live-in physical therapy facility for the next 2 months. They had an incredible amount of medical bills on this, but the drunk driver in the case pled the fifth. He didn't, he doesn't have to answer any questions. Pled the fifth on where he'd been, how much he'd had to drink, all that kind of stuff. We subpoenaed the records from his criminal defense attorney to try to get just the video cam footage and things from that nature that had been turned over from the DA to the criminal defense attorney. And she fought it tooth and nail and drug it out. There's a 2-year statute of limitations on crashes. You can either file suit or settle a case within 2 years. If you don't do that, then you lose your right to do anything. And they drug that out to where that information, they drug out his case, even though it was very clear cut. He had like 17 empty beer cans in his truck. The DPS officer testified as to how incredibly just wasted this guy was, but couldn't turn over a lot of that information either. And the statute of limitations ran before any of his conviction or anything happened, and we were never able to get that timely in order to use it in the case. The insurance company was willing to pay out at the end before the statute ran, but I had to go down to the courthouse 5 different times on hearings trying to get that information, and we just couldn't get it within.
And the other reason, and the other reason why that situation is so frustrating for Jamie's clients and for many others is because a lot of times these drunks, they just came from a bar or they just came from a restaurant, and there can be liability against the bar or restaurant for overserving the drunk person. And if you can't get that information of where they came from, they just can't, whatever restaurant, Chili's, wherever they had too much to drink, they were overserved. If you don't get that information within 2 years, even if the drunk knows, his defense attorney knows, the criminal defense attorney and civil defense, even if they know that stuff, if we don't get it in 2 years, there is no, we call it a dram shop case. There's no dram shop case because you have to file a lawsuit against that particular place within 2 years. And that's really sad because in the case of Jamie Lynn's clients, I guarantee their medical bills were multiples above the policy limits. Typically, the less responsible people are, typically the lower the insurance policy amounts that they have. There's just a direct correlation. Rarely do you see a guy running around town with a $500,000 or $1 million policy that's getting wasted all the time. You just don't see that because the people with 500,000 or $1 million, those are people who actually have something to lose and they're a lot more responsible. So luckily, I cannot. We got so lucky on a case where my guy was on a motorcycle. He got slammed, suffered traumatic brain injury, was at the hospital for 14 days. Luckily, the drunk girl admitted to exactly where she had been at. And luckily, the police officer actually wrote down the name of the establishment, which happens all the time. They'll say like, oh yeah, a drunk person said they were just at the restaurant around the corner. Well, which one? You try to figure it out. But luckily, this case I got going on right now is she named the establishment. The officer put the name of the establishment in the report, and there's only 2 of them in town. And kind of based on where she lived and where the crash was, we're like, it's got to be that one. And so we just filed a lawsuit. Of course, they're like, we have no idea what's going on. We never heard anything about this. TABC, by the way, TABC is supposed to be notified, right? When they get told, hey, this drunk person just caused a crash and they just came from this specific establishment, TABC is supposed to be notified. So they go do an investigation into that establishment. Of course, that didn't happen, right? So, of course, it's just how it works. So we filed a lawsuit. The establishment did their own investigation, and the more information they're uncovering, the video and the videos that they have, and they have to keep all the receipts. It's pretty bad for them. And so, but luckily we're able to do all this within the 2 years, and we're able to get a lot of the backdoor information that normally we wouldn't be able to get, because these defendants, they always plead the fifth until their criminal case has been resolved. But in this situation, like I'm telling you, her criminal case is not resolved. It just happened. Her lawyers are going to drag it out. It's just what they do as well. So yeah, and that's the unfortunate thing about our job. It's what the unfortunate thing for our clients, and there's just nothing we can do.
Yeah, that's the most interesting thing. Yeah, Jamie?
I was going to say, yes, I mean, and it's fortunate for Steve's client in this particular case, but you can't count on luck on these types of cases. You know, you get ones where you have favorable facts and cooperative defendants, but that's really kind of rare. And so you've got to be vigilant.
Yeah, because what I mentioned, I thought it was interesting how the location kept getting brought up during the explanations of like past cases, current cases, and stories. And Jamie, I want to know, so say like, for instance, like an establishment overserved someone. As a victim, can I only go against the drunk driver, or can I also go against the establishment also?
Yeah, well, and the lawyerly answer, of course, is it depends. But yes, you do have a potential. If they have been at a establishment, a business establishment that has overserved them, of course, they're going to have some defenses there. They're supposed to train their waiters and waitresses and make sure that they have the training from the TABC. That gives them what they call a safe harbor defense, that these waiters and waitresses have been trained so as to avoid overserving people. So, but the reality is, and having worked in restaurants myself earlier in life, I can personally attest that there's a push among restaurants that serve alcohol to sell drinks and to upsell those drinks so that you can make more money off of it. And some establishments are much more responsible than others, no question about it. But you do find bars where they have a reputation for overserving. Everybody in town knows that they overserve, and that's where people go to get drunk. And that's when you have to be able to go in and show, look, there is an active policy by this establishment to overserve. We actually encourage our employees to get people drunk so that we can make more money off of them. And that is kind of the wedge that you need to get in there. And you've just, it can be a difficult claim to pursue, but they are viable as long as you can get the evidence that you need to show that they violated either their own policies or the state's policies. I'm sure Steve can add to that.
Yeah, it's true. And look, if your client's injured, it's pretty significant. You just got to take the shotgun approach, file a lawsuit and find out what happens and just keep digging and digging and digging. So the good news is these establishments, they are required to keep all the receipts. Okay. Most of them have videos. Unfortunately, though, sometimes the video gets turned over to the police as part of the criminal investigation, and you won't get that video. But they'll keep the receipts. They know who the employees were that were working at the bar. A lot of times the receipts will say like the table number, or like if it was at the bar or a specific table, you can kind of figure out how much the person had to drink. And then you can kind of figure out if the establishment, if they're fudging on the discovery responses, kind of doctoring some of this paperwork, which, look, some of these people are smart. Some of the lawyers get in. I'm not saying the lawyers fudge evidence, but it's absolutely been known to happen many a time. And as a plaintiff's attorney, you just got to be vigilant and just keep digging and digging and digging. You got to take depositions and just really find out exactly what happened. And again, though, there is a different standard between going after the bar versus going after the drunk driver, like Jamie alluded to. But the better evidence you have, the more evidence you have that the person, the drunk, had a lot of drinks and was overserved, typically the better your case is. Now, it's kind of interesting is people do these dram shop cases not only for the victims of drunk drivers where they get hit by a drunk driver that was overserved at the restaurant or bar, but sometimes some lawyers will even take the actual drunk person. So if the drunk person drives off an embankment and dies or whatever, some people will take those cases too and say, hey, I represent this drunk person that died. He was drunk, he or she was drunk, but let me show you the video. Let me show you the evidence that this bar intentionally overserved them to where they ultimately became basically incapacitated and had no business ever buying more drinks, and definitely had no business ever leaving that bar.
And let them go when they were clearly intoxicated.
And let them go, exactly. And let them go knowing they were completely incapacitated at that point.
That's
those cases. I haven't taken those cases. I haven't been in that position. Maybe Jamie has, but I've only been on the end of a victim that was crashed into through no negligence of his or her own.
Because that's new to me. How someone can be the drunk person can be represented in a dram shop case, and that had me thinking, if someone is represented in one of these cases and somehow in a hypothetical situation proves that the establishment overserved them, could that same results be used against them in the case where they caused that accident, caused a car crash? Is that possible?
I would want that. Yeah. I mean, so in my cases, in my dram shop cases, I want the drunk person to be like, oh, this bartender, he was whispering sweet nothings in my ear, and he was, leading me on and give me all these shots for free and I would love that because look, the reality is the establishment, they're going to have a much larger insurance policy. Okay. Usually it's like $1 million insurance policy. Usually. Now some bars, a lot of these dive bars, basically the dram shop side of the policy, I've learned this the hard way, at least, especially here in San Antonio, for whatever reason, this particular case that I'm thinking of, the lawyer tendered the policy and said, look, they didn't even have the, basically it was excluded that they are responsible for overserving. And that was news to me. And another time, apparently the same outfit has a different bar with a policy that has $15,000 in coverage. So, but in general though, yeah, the restaurant will have a much larger insurance policy than that driver. That the minimum here in Texas is $30,000. So, you would want them to try to throw the bartender and throw the establishment under the bus, because you're going to get the driver of their insurance company at that point is more likely just to tender the money. In fact, a lot of times they just want to tender. The attorneys call you up and say, "Hey, just take it. Send me a demand. I want to pay you out." That's what you tell them, like, no, I'm not going to release the drunk because I need them to testify against the bar or against the restaurant.
And unfortunately, one thing that is harmful is, speaking of the dive bars, there's no requirement in Texas that bars even carry insurance. And if they do, there's no requirement that they register or provide that information to the TABC. I had a family of 5 who was coming home from a church function a number of years ago, who were hit head on again by a drunk driver, killed 5 people. And the drunk driver admitted, he said, I bought a 24 pack, started drinking that morning. I went to this bar about 6 o'clock. I already could barely see where I was going when I walked into the bar. I was stumbling, I was slurring. They sat down and gave me 6 more beers within the hour and a half that I was there. And then I stumbled out. He said, I could barely walk. I was swaying back and forth. He says, I remember that much. Got in my car, drove down the road and killed 5 people. And the bar had no insurance. And because it was a small bar, the owners didn't have a ton of money. So there was really no way to actually get anything fair to compensate this family who got killed.
Yeah, that was a mind-blowing thing. When I learned that the bars do not actually have to have coverage, I just thought it was crazy. I mean, you have to have coverage if you want to drive on the road. If you drive an 18-wheeler, you have a commercial motor vehicle, the minimum, if you're just in the state of Texas, just driving around in the state, the minimum is 500,000. But if you're going interstate between Texas and a different state, a minimum is $1 million. So no minimums for bars, even though how many crimes, not just DUIs and car wrecks, how many like sexual assaults, rapes, murders, people getting shot all the time. How many of those occurred because of what's happened at these bars? It's mind blowing, and it's really sad. So
yeah, it's sad. Jumping off your story and previous case, Jamie, I wanted to ask, because we covered, after the collision happens, what can I do if the driver was drunk? We covered about the location, but what if someone is currently driving? What do I suspect? What can I do if I suspect if someone's driving while intoxicated? And also I wanted to ask, why do victims suffer more serious injuries when it comes to drunk driving collisions?
Both good questions. The most prudent, safe thing to do is, if you see a driver on the road who is driving erratically and dangerously, is keep your distance, first of all, because you don't want them running into you, or you don't want them suddenly stopping or doing something or swerving into you or anything like that. Keep a safe distance, but maybe keep an eye on it. Then, if you can do it safely and you can do it legally, contact 911 and report the road you're on, where you're going, and what you're seeing and what you're witnessing. And hopefully you can give them the license plate number and a description of the vehicle. Obviously, you need to do that hands-free. You do not want to be using any kind of device that would distract you or anything like that from your operation of your vehicle. But absolutely need to make sure that gets reported, because not only may you be saving the life of that drunk person, but anybody that they might hit or cause injury to. And the second question, remind me again what that was.
Yeah, basically, why do they suffer more serious injuries because of drunk driving? And also, why do usually the victims suffer more serious injuries than the drunk driver themselves?
The reason that you see a greater degree of injury or greater injury, I guess worse injuries in those cases, is because people who are drunk aren't driving under the speed limit most of the time. They're driving above the speed limit. They're driving much more erratically. They are driving in such a way that, they'll turn in front of an oncoming vehicle that's traveling at the speed limit. A lot of these crashes and stuff happen on the highways because, the drunk drivers are trying to get wherever they're going, or they'll happen on the frontage road right alongside and they're speeding. That happens a lot. You running red lights, turning, failing to yield the right of way at intersections, all kinds of reasons, but they're usually at higher speeds and much greater impacts. You see a lot of head-ons because when somebody is intoxicated, if there's a light coming towards them, their eyes drift that way, and it causes them to steer in that direction because they're not in full control of their capacities, and they'll drift over, and so you get a head-on collision, and obviously that's going to cause a very severe injury or death. The reason that the drunks themselves often walk away without a scratch is because their body's more relaxed, and they're not tensed up, and they are much less inclined to be in such a position physically that they'll be injured. My great uncle used to always say, God looks out for drunks and little babies for some reason. It seems to be the case.
Oh, wow. It's something I was hearing y'all speak, and y'all were covering like the criminal side of things. And I wanted to know, Steve, when hearing y'all speaking with other attorneys, I learned that arrests aren't really necessary to pursue civil claims, but when there is an arrest, when something is made with a DWI, it can actually be beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, it's more evidence, right, that the officer thought that the driver did something wrong. And so usually when that's detailed in the report that the driver was arrested, it's like, hey, this is, the insurance company will see that and go, okay, jury's going to hear that. Because at the minimum, you at least get to ask the driver, how did you leave the scene of the crash? Like, oh, I was in the back seat of the police car. So jury's going to say, okay, we got it. We figured this out. So, yeah, I mean, obviously it's better evidence for the case. And even though we have a lower burden of proof, what you do want to establish for the negligence, lower burden of proof for the negligence, but for gross negligence, where you can get punitive damages, okay, you have a higher burden of proof. It's called clear and convincing. So it basically means that whatever, I mean, the jurors got to be convinced, and all the jurors have to actually agree that there was gross negligence, and they have to agree on the amount. And the punitive damages portion, that's where you hear jurors giving, billion-dollar verdicts, right? Like, multi-hundred million, billion-dollar. Johnson & Johnson's got tagged for $4.2 billion. A lot of that was for pain and suffering and whatever else, but the bulk of those billion-dollar verdicts, and that's because of punitive damages, because the jurors looking to punish the wrongdoer in that case. So and that's where the threat, we can talk about whether or not punitive damages are part of insurance policies or not, or auto policies, but that's the idea, is the arrest and that evidence right there that help you get to the punitive damages for the case.
And if I may on that, that's very true. The punitive the punitive part of that is hopefully to correct the behavior, to ensure that they don't repeat those types of actions in the future for big businesses as well as drunk drivers. Hopefully it will penalize the drunk driver to the point that they decide, I'm not going through that again, and I'm not going to pay that out. Or the insurance company ultimately will feel the same way. Another good thing as far as investigating and having that when you have an arrest is even if before the statute is run, the case gets pled out or anything, they're usually on some degree of probation or anything like that, even if there's no jail time or anything like that. So we always make it a practice to go down and pull the actual physical records of the criminal file, even after the case has been pled out. I had a case involving a DWI a number of years ago where I took the deposition of the guy. He had pled out the case and was on parole, or probation rather. And I asked him, you're complying with all your probation requirements? Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. You haven't had any problems with it? No, sir. Haven't had any drinks? No. We went down and pulled the records, and sure enough, the DA had 3 separate motions on file to revoke the probation committed in violation of his probation requirements. And so we were able to use that to impeach him later on, and to show that, because part of the defense is this poor guy, he's paid the price. He's gone through the criminal trial. Don't punish him anymore financially because he's paid his price. But he hasn't. He hasn't learned his lesson. He's still doing the same sort of thing, and he's going to put somebody at risk again. And so that's another reason why having the arrest records and having a complete copy of the file on that is so important in a case like this.
Yeah, and just to add on what Jamie just said, it's a pretty common defense in the civil cases to say, look, folks, everybody screws up. We've all made a mistake. Okay. He served in jail 30 days. He paid his, restitute. Lots of times there's a fine. Sometimes they'll admit whether or not their driver's license was suspended. So they'll say, look, he's already paid the price, folks, to garner a little bit of sympathy. And it's pretty amazing when here's the plaintiff sitting there with $100,000 in medical bills unpaid, but yet their attorney's trying to say like, oh no, it's, we're even. And it's pretty disingenuous, but unfortunately, sometimes it works. If you got that defendant where the jury actually believes good kid, college kid, just one screw up, they might not really assess big damages for the plaintiffs. And again, the plaintiffs did nothing wrong. It's just kind of how the jury system works every once in a while, unfortunately for plaintiffs here in Texas.
Yeah, that's new to me.
And the another unfortunate problem. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you can go.
I was going to say, another unfortunate thing that you have, as Steve touched on, is they've got $100,000 in unpaid medical bills out there because they couldn't afford health insurance or for whatever, or they had huge deductibles or whatever that may be. Well, who covers the cost on that? If the drunk driver and his insurance company don't pay that, who does? The American taxpayers. The citizens of this state wind up taking up that bill, and the person that committed the act, who should be taking responsibility, and his insurance company, who should be taking responsibility for it, they get off scot-free. They get a pass, and we foot the bill.
By the way, I know we talk about insurance companies a lot, but here in San Antonio, I don't know what's like in Austin, but here in San Antonio, there's a lot of these really third-rate, I call them junk carriers, junk insurance. They advertise. They will literally say, they'll have cars, billboards, whatever, in Spanish, English. They'll say, oh, 2 DWIs, no problem. No driver's license, no problem. SR22, which is, talk about that later if you want. No problem. You're the worst human being in the world, a huge criminal who has no business driving a vehicle in the state of Texas. No problem. We'll take your money. We'll insure you. It's amazing. And so I cannot believe these companies even exist, but we talk a lot about the insurance companies. I think they have some responsibility. I think they're complicit in a lot of this because they allow these really bad actors to be on the road. Now, some of them don't have insurance, some don't have driver's license, and they're borrowing somebody's car or they stole a car, whatever. That's a different story. But it's amazing how much the insurance companies are a part of this. And then obviously after the crash happens, they're like, okay, hold on, how can we get out of this? Or how can we, deny this or defend this? It's pretty wild. It's sad, really. It's really what it comes down to. It's sad because who pays the price? All of us do. Because when our clients go to the hospital and they have to be there for 12 days and they don't have insurance, who pays for that hospital bill? All of us, right? Through our property taxes and whatever else. So there's a common phrase, right? Corporate welfare. That's a common phrase right now. And going along, that's it. This is it. This is corporate welfare for these insurance companies. So they get out of paying for damages that their own insured cause that all of us now have to pay. They shift it to the taxpayers. That's what corporate, or to the government. So
that's right. Yeah, insurance companies aren't in the business of paying out on claims. They make their money by not paying out on claims and taking your premiums every month. So that it's in their own personal interest as a corporation to resist these and find every way they can to avoid paying or pay as little as possible.
Yeah, because it's sad how insurance companies won't pay, when stuff like this happens. What's even crazier is when y'all were speaking is how like the after the criminal case, when the civil case happens, how all the sympathy starts to be shown towards the person who committed the crime, like, or the collision, the drunk driver with the DWI. And
It
it's
was a
like,
crime.
yeah,
It's a crime.
for for sure,
In,
for sure.
in most cities, they'll still issue a citation for hitting somebody. San Antonio, they won't. They do not care. You can kill somebody. You won't get a citation for it, unfortunately.
Oh, wow.
Even if it's just negligent, you just happen to kill somebody. San Antonio Police Department, they say from the DA, they don't want to issue citations. Moving Austin, I know for a fact they do. In a lot of small towns, they issue citations just for rear-ending somebody. They'll issue a citation. So that is a crime. Misdemeanor is a crime. But clearly, though, felon, a drunk driving, felony assault, it could be a felony, much higher. Sorry, what's the phrase I'm looking for? A much higher degree of crime committed.
Okay, and I wanted, before we moved on to more of like the impairment stuff, I wanted to throw out a hypothetical question to both of y'all. And that would
Is this personal? Is this a personal experience that you're facing?
No. Because I've always wondered, like, I popped this, like, somehow I thought of this, and I was like, this would be interesting to get y'all's takes, your perspectives. And that's if two drunk drivers crash into each other, what would happen? Who would be liable? And would it be difficult establishing liability? Like, Jamie, I was trying to...
Okay, I would say, just again, it depends on a lot of different factors there.
You have those cases, Jamie? Because I do.
Do I have what?
You have those cases? Because I do.
I have had cases like that, and they're really based on the individual facts. You could have somebody who has alcohol in their system, but they're below the legal limit. That in and of itself is not always enough, because everybody processes alcohol differently and have higher tolerances. Some people can be far above the legal limit and exhibit no outward signs of intoxication because they drink so much that their tolerance is high. My wife can have half a glass of wine and she's stumbling all over the place. But she would definitely be below the legal limit. And so the comparative level of intoxicity within both of the individuals, I think, would play a factor in it. I think how the crash happened. If your guy has been, if your guy has been drinking, but they're properly stopped at a stoplight, and some drunk guy comes slamming up and rear ends them, well, our guy, even though he had alcohol in his system, may have even been above the legal limit, but he did nothing wrong to cause or contribute to that crash. And so I think that his potential intoxication shouldn't even be a factor in considering any kind of liability there.
Yeah, they will try, the defense will try to allude to the fact to say, look, my guy probably shouldn't have been on the road, but neither should he. But you don't really get to say that and say they shouldn't have been on the road in the first place if they did nothing wrong. But look, what Jamie said earlier about the time of the morning, Saturday morning, 2-3 in the morning, most common, all the time, car wrecks happen. Oh, we got T-bone. Oh, we got hit by a drunk driver. Pull the police report. Well, yeah, 1-2 in the morning on a Saturday. What were you doing? And like, well, we were just leaving a place. And so first of all, look, nobody that's sober, nobody that's, got family, kids, nobody should be on the roads, in my opinion, after midnight, especially not in big cities. And I refuse to drive. I do not care. I will not drive after midnight in San Antonio. There's just too many drunks on the road. But yes, I've had many cases where my clients were also drunk. Now, luckily, the police officer didn't do a breathalyzer on them or didn't, really investigate them. He or she was more focused on the person that caused the crash. And, but yeah, very common. Two drunks get into a crash, like
Yeah.
bees attracted to honey, just,
Right.
and, I know we're joking about it, but it is serious, but it's a sad thing. Look, I mean, that most people, in my opinion, in my experience, most people on the road, 1:30, 2 in the morning, shouldn't be on the road. And whatever, something was going on. So,
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I actually have a case right now where I have a guy, our client had worked all day doing hard labor out in the sun, stopped off at a bar, had 3 drinks over about 2 hours worth of time, and was driving home on I-35, and his eyes started closing. He said, I couldn't drive. And he did the responsible thing. He pulled over to the side of the road onto a improved shoulder, and was probably about 10 feet. It was a big wide shoulder. He was probably 10 feet from the line where the actual highway started, and stopped and parked just to rest his eyes and not so that he didn't hurt anybody. And another drunk driver is coming up the road. Another driver had already called in and reported that this guy was weaving all over the place. And sure enough, he swerves over, smashes in, rear ends our guy, who's over on the side of the road on a 4-lane highway, hits him so hard that his truck, from a stop, spins around all the way up to the other side of the highway and crashes into the barrier there. So our guy had alcohol in his system, but he was acting responsibly. He did nothing wrong to cause or contribute to this crash. And the police officers spoke to him and have said he exhibited no signs of, intoxication whatsoever. I'd had no suspicion whatsoever that he had been drinking. And I sat and talked to him for maybe a good 20 minutes, maybe 2-3 feet away from him. So I didn't smell alcohol in his breath, nothing like that. But the insurance company for this other guy is saying, well, he must have been drunk, because why would he pull over on the side of the road and be parked over there?
yeah.
Well, because he was being responsible.
Yeah.
That's why.
That type of case is very common, where folks pull over, and for what I bet you his lights were on,
Mm-hmm.
and those red rear lights, it's like an attraction, like a magnet for drunk people, and just follow the lights, even if the lights are off the road. Had a lot of those. I'm not sure what the science is behind that, but so I tell people, look, if you're on a main road, you're going to pull over, just take the next exit,
Right.
Then go into a gas station or McDonald's parking lot. Like, get the heck off a main road. You can still get hit really hard.
Mm-hmm. Overall, like, I didn't know that was more of a common occurrence than what I thought. I thought that's rare. But moving on from drunk driving and DWIs, I wanted to move on to more the, I guess, impaired with like drugs and medical driving. And the first question I want to ask Jamie is that, oftentimes we hear about drug driving, most people's mind goes to like marijuana and other drugs like that. But I want to ask, can prescription medication impair driving?
Prescription medication certainly can, particularly those that are derived from opioids, but also non-prescription, over-the-counter drugs can also negatively affect your ability to drive and impair you. NyQuil, Benadryl, any other kind of cold medicine that might cause drowsiness or sleepiness, brain cloudiness, things of that nature, happens all the time. And it's very common for it to happen. Not only that, but you do have people who abuse over-the-counter medications as well. Sometimes they'll pour an excessive amount of cough medicine or something like that into a Coke or something, and mix it up, and that's what they drink while they're driving down the road, and it impairs their ability to drive. Again, last year there were 3,835 automobile collisions involving drug use and impairment due to drugs, both prescription and non-prescription, killed 325 people and injured 1,897 people. as a result. This is a very common problem, and it is a very dangerous thing to do, even though a lot of people, particularly with over-the-counter medications, don't really consider that to be something that is dangerous or harmful.
I bet you that statistic, the 325 deaths, I bet you it's a lot higher. The reason why I say that is because a lot of times they don't get caught. Okay.
Yeah.
They don't get caught being on cocaine. They don't get caught being on hydro. And the reason being is because after the crash, what happens to everybody, right? Their adrenaline, everybody's like awake, everybody's, and then a lot of times, they'll say like, oh my gosh, I'm just really rattled right now. I'm scared. But the reality is they're actually still buzzed, but the police officer's like, oh yeah, for sure. And there's no breathalyzer for hydrocodone. There's no breathalyzer for marijuana or cocaine. What are they going to do? Go do a blood test for marijuana? That could have been from 2, 3, 4 weeks ago. So there's nothing immediate. Now there's companies that are trying to come up with a marijuana breathalyzer, particularly for states where it's legal, like in Colorado and whatnot. But good luck with that. And I hope they do come up with something like that, because it's going to become more and more common as marijuana becomes, legalized throughout the entire country. But the question is, how can you prove that that's what caused the crash or was a contributing factor? Very, very difficult. Usually with old people, they might kind of say like, oh, you might find something on the police report, particularly with older people, say, oh, I blacked out before, I forget what's going on. Well, again, that's a red flag. Hey, we need to look into this. So then you take their deposition, find out who their doctor is, find out who their pharmacy is. You go subpoena those records, try to figure out like what was all the drugs that they were taking around that time, and you start looking them all up and adding up the math and go, oh my gosh, this caused drowsiness. This says do not drive. Don't ever, drive for the next 24 hours on this med. So you kind of back that up. But in terms of a police officer coming out and saying, hey, here it is, folks, we found it. They were on this drug. Very, very rare. In fact, I've seen so many police officers let the driver get away with, oh, I'm just tired. I'm just really fatigued. Long day at work. Woke up extra early. And then I had a huge shift, at my job. Oh, well, where do you work at? Wherever. I work at Walmart, huge shift. I am just completely fatigued. And then you find out, and then they go to, oh, by the way, I got a case like this where those are the facts. And they go tell the EMS, oh yeah, by the way, I smoked pot and drank beer earlier. They tell that to the EMS at the crash scene. Did the EMS tell that to the police officer? No. Did the officer ever find out? No. They got away with it. So it's just, unfortunately, especially with these drugs where you can't get an instant breathalyzer test, or by the way, you can't just go and prick somebody's arm and take a blood test. You got to get a warrant for all that. It's really hard to be able to find out exactly what they're on, unless there is some actual evidence, which every once in a while maybe you can get, but more often than not, they're just stuffing underneath their seat. Unless you can find the empty cartridge, they get away with it. And unfortunately, that's why they do it, because they get away with it.
Yeah. And I want to say, I mean, when we're talking about some of what we see in some of these cases, the failures of law enforcement when they're investigating this, that's not to say that we're blaming law enforcement. It's a chaotic situation often.
Right.
There are a lot of different things going on, and one officer may think another officer has gotten certain information, and in the chaos of the moment, they didn't have an opportunity to confirm that information. So we're not saying that we're not faulting them necessarily, but we are acknowledging that it's a reality that happens from time to time.
Yeah, look, in a big city, Friday night, Saturday night, when people are getting shot and killed all over the place, they arrive at a crash scene. Everybody's walking and talking. Maybe a couple people will go by EMS. They're not going to go impound that car and go get a warrant out to go do a full, go through the gas tank to make sure there's no drugs there or in the spare tire. They can't do that, unfortunately. I mean, unless they actually suspect it and they find it. But it's just, for a lot of officers, look, it's a numbers game. They only have a limited amount of time, and it's very common. They'll even tell the victim, hey, hire a lawyer. Yeah. I've gotten cases where the officer said, call the Carlson law firm. Call the Carlson law firm. They'll take care of you. They'll figure this stuff out. look, and it's true, because most of the times in those cases, again, smaller policy limits, you do some digging, you find out this guy is a huge dirtball, has, a past history of drug use and alcohol use and excuse me, not just drug and alcohol use, but actually driving under the influence. And the insurance company ends up doing the right thing and paying out the limits, and so the client can move on. But again, not always the case. I've had a lot of clients that are police officers, so no way are we sitting here trashing police officers, but it's just the reality. There's only so many minutes and hours a day that everybody can look into this.
Yeah, and speaking on, this impaired driving with prescription medication or non-prescription medication, I want to ask, when something like that does happen, what kind of, Jamie, I want to ask you, what kind of civil penalties does someone face?
Civil penalties would be the personal injury claims that you would have. Criminal penalties are the ones that would basically mirror those of DWI. It's the impairment, the mental and physical impairment that you have under the influence of these particular substances. And so as far as a civil penalty goes, there's really no civil penalty aside from the potential of a judicial determination by a jury that you were liable for having harmed somebody and need to pay the fair amount of compensation for those injuries.
Okay. All right.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. So we covered, drunk driving, covered impaired driving, and I wanted to lightly touch on distracted driving, because I feel like that sort of plays a role in what could be deadly collisions also. And Steve, I wanted to start with you. What challenges in distracted driving cases are there that don't really exist in DWI's drunk driving cases?
Right. So most common means of distraction in vehicles is cell phone use. So the biggest challenge is to prove that not only were they on the phone, whether, talking on the phone is one thing, but actually using the phone for texting or for the data, right, which is the internet, watching YouTube, or to actually prove that they were using that at the time of the crash. And that's what distracted them. So there are cell phone forensic experts here in Texas, one in particular that I use on a lot of my cases, where, immediately when we file a lawsuit, we subpoena the cell phone records, which, by the way, it's not easy getting those because they always forget their cell phone number or who their carrier was. You have to know the cell phone number, and you have to know who the carrier is, like AT&T, Verizon, or whoever. So then you send a subpoena. A lot of those carriers, they delete certain information within 6 months. So unfortunately, some of that information gets lost. But with these carriers, though, you do often get basically these line by lines that'll show what time was the call made, who made was the call received or was the call sent out, text message, who was it received and was it sent out. And then you can do what they call like a cell phone extraction. So a lot of times you get more information by extracting all the data from a cell phone than what you can get from those cell phone records. So
if you can get a hold of the cell phone.
If you can get a hold of the cell phone, right? So that's the whole other thing. Sometimes you got to get TRO or whatnot, but you can line up a lot of times. Hey, crash was at this time. This guy was on the phone 5 minutes prior for a 10-minute call, gets off, and then immediately calls 911, or here's all these text message conversations going back and forth. Now, here's a common defense, though, that we're seeing more and more often. You go, oh, well, yeah, they were on the phone, but it's Bluetooth, right? It's a 2018 Ford, GM, whatever, Bluetooth. It's hard to say that that's not true because, frankly, I'm on my phone all the time when in the car through my Bluetooth system. There's really no way to prove, from what I know, there's no way to prove whether or not the phone was emitting the conversation through that Bluetooth signal through the car speaker system. My understanding is you can't. So you can go back and kind of backtrack and try to determine that. But the other way is just try to figure out, okay, well, who was in the vehicle with the driver? Was there a whole bunch of passengers? What's going on in the car? Sometimes you can find out that, oh, two of these passengers were drunk, right? So we got the driver, the sober guy, driving home a bunch of drunks. Well, more often than not, a bunch of drunk passengers, maybe they're still partying it up. That's kind of a distraction in the vehicle. So, but yes, it's very, very common. It's the most common form of a car wreck here, not just in Texas, but throughout the U.S. It's just distraction through cell phones and other electronic devices. One more example. Okay, everybody loves Amazon, everybody loves FedEx and UPS, but look, these guys have kind of their own versions of like a power pad that gets signals sent to them while they're driving. They can be on a route going from point A to point B, and they get a signal saying, oh, hey, stop right here. Go pick up this package during their route. So they have to be on alert, not just in the traffic, but paying attention to their power pad. If they miss that, they got to stop, turn around, and go back, and they have to do their route within a certain period of time. So it sounds like an obstacle course that you watch on TV, right? Like a Nickelodeon obstacle course, like, oh, all of a sudden they're throwing things at you while you're trying to race. But that's kind of what's going on with these drivers. So no doubt those guys are really distracted during their routes because they're trying to do their job. And if they don't, they get penalized or they don't meet bonuses, or it's a tough job. And unfortunately, the way these systems are set up, these drivers, they're absolutely being distracted.
Yeah. Jamie, you want to ask something?
Oh, I was going to say that's true. And that's also true for 18-wheeler, things like that. A lot of them have directional devices and other things within the cab that can also distract them. And we know that driving while distracted, using your cell phone, there have been a number of peer-reviewed studies that have confirmed that using your cell phone or a non-hands-free device while you're operating a vehicle is just as dangerous, if not more so, than driving while under the influence of alcohol. And the statistics are showing that as well. Determining whether or not somebody's been on a cell phone or another device sometimes is kind of difficult within itself, even when you have a police investigation, a crash report, because the police crash report has a section for contributing factors, what they think caused or contributed to the crash. And there's 3 categories for distracted driving that they use kind of interchangeably, just depending on the particular officer or the particular department. You've got a distraction in the vehicle, you've got driver inattention, and then you've got cellular or mobile device use, which is then broken down into another 4 categories. And so, but at least that's an indication that they were operating some type of device that caused them to be distracted and contributed to the crash. And then again, fall back on recent statistics again, there were 75,477 crashes in Texas just last year that were attributed to some sort of distraction in the motor vehicle. 22,457 people hurt and 368 people were killed because of it. There are some laws now that require you to use hands-free devices if you're going to be operating a mobile device of some sort or some electronic communications device in the vehicle. In addition to that, a number of cities, I know that Austin does, I believe San Antonio does, and I'm certain that Dallas and Houston have specific ordinances mandating hands-free use of a electronic device. And so those are all things that can again go towards establishing liability. If they're using it and it caused the crash, it could, and you're absolutely prohibited from using that device in the manner that you were. That's what we would call negligence per se. That is, and basically that person was negligent in and of itself by committing that act, and that helps you in establishing the liability of the other driver, and can also assist you in potentially evaluating damages that you would receive from that higher than you otherwise would.
Yeah, and looping back to police officers with their investigation, they're not typically allowed to just start taking your cell phone and dig through it. They need a warrant for that. So now there are times where there might be conversations like, hey, were you just on the phone? Who's your most recent person that you spoke with or texted with? And if it's a cooperative person who oftentimes are scared and they're, they'll show the police officer. But again, it's the reason why it's so important for a lawyer to get involved is because we can do a more thorough investigation to find out this information that a police officer either can't do because they're prohibited by law without a warrant, or they just don't have enough time to do. They can't spend. I mean, how much time do you think you spend on a case in litigation, Jamie, as part of your investigation? I mean, tens and tens, dozens and dozens of hours, maybe 100 plus hours just with depositions. A police officer cannot do that. They can't spend 100 hours investigating a car crash like what we can. And so fortunately, there are resources that we can take advantage of to try to establish liability and establish these higher levels of negligence per se, against the driver that caused the crash.
Yeah, and going back to what Steve was saying, as far as some of the obstacles that we face in that, when you are able to subpoena or get the cell phone or electronic communication device of whatever nature it is, when you get that information, you've got to be able to interpret it, because the times on there are typically not Central Standard Time. They do it on the Meridian line, and so I've had a number of cases where we've gotten those records and the defense attorney on the other side isn't familiar with how the billing or how that statement is read. And they're like, look, see, that person wasn't on their phone at the time. So there, you can't even make this claim. And I'm going to try to, get the judge to throw that out. Well, if you go back and you look at the correct manner in which it's to be interpreted and find out the correct times, you can see that the guy clearly was on their phone at the time of the crash. And so you've got to make sure not only that you get those records, but if you can't do it yourself, which sometimes they're pretty difficult, find the correct expert who can and go through there and correctly read those things.
There was a criminal trial that I watched. My buddy was trying a case, and even the DA was getting mixed up with, it's called UTC time. Coordinated Universal Time. Even the DA was getting mixed up, and that's because and there are time zone changes. If you're trying to loop it back to Central Time, well, you got to figure out what time of the year based on time zone changes was UTC time for these records. It's again, when I saw a DA trying to prosecute a case and they couldn't even figure it out, it made me realize, oh my gosh, like they have a much higher burden than us. And so all the more reason to get a lawyer that hires an expert that can interpret these things, who can testify of exactly, what the time is when they did receive the text or they did make the phone call.
Yeah, for sure. Get someone that can properly go through all the records and everything. And I wanted to get both of your opinions on something, but before I do, because we had mentioned talking on the phone and texting as a form of distracted driving, and so there's plenty of other things that are common forms of distracted driving, such as like reading, changing music on your phone, like talking to other passengers, like looking away at the road. There's tons of other things. Almost everything basically is distracted driving. Taking your eyes off the road, whether that's visually, you're not thinking about what's happening on the road, you're not listening for other cars, or you're just not in the right headspace mentally when it comes to driving. But I want to get both of your guys' opinions on why do you think people or drivers care more about talking on the phone or changing music or texting someone rather than their safety on the road? Steve, I want to start with you on this one.
Look, it's unfortunately, it's just how we are. We have 30 seconds of time by ourselves. Everybody gets bored, and the other thing is we got this wonderful device right here, the cell phone. It is amazingly distracting. Look what's going on. You press a button, you can figure out what your friends are doing all across the world. You can listen to radio stations that are live right now in Saudi Arabia or Antarctica. I mean, anything you want in this world, we're in the information age. It's on our cell phone. So yeah.
And it's chiming every 10 seconds to let you know that somebody else has done something.
It's notifications, exactly. So we live in the information age, and what that means is we have kind of become accustomed to become extremely distracted and unfocused on the present. We're just not focused on the present. And one thing with our cell phones, look, it's great with Bluetooth. We can type in that radio or any CD or album, whatever they want to listen to, and it just shoots right into a radio, and we can listen to it. 30 years ago, it'd be hidden. Oh, let me mess with the radio dial. Oh, it's commercial. Got to go to the next radio station, back and forth. Lots of car crashes. In fact, my sister got into a crash within the first 2 weeks of her having her driver's license, blew through a stop sign because she was messing with her radio dial. So why do we do that? Because I'm not going to say everybody has ADD, but it's because we do not live in, most people don't live in the present. And if they got 20 minutes on their own, hey, I can catch up with my friends. I can catch up with my neighbors. I can catch up to this audiobook I was listening to. It's just so much things that we can do, that we're able to do while we're driving. And these new cars, they allow us to do that. My truck, I have Wi-Fi in my truck. Mm-hmm. So now Wi-Fi is off while the car is running. And then a lot of times there is a way to override that in case you got passengers using the Wi-Fi. But look, our vehicles are becoming rolling cell phones, rolling computers as well. And I suspect it's just going to continue to get worse. Vehicles are now trying to drive themselves, so we can work in our cars on the way to work or do whatever, take a nap, I guess is the new thing. So it's just, unfortunately, to answer your question, I think it's just the way we are. And that's how, the world has us going. Jamie, do you find yourself more and more distracted than you were when you were a teenager, when you first driving on the road?
I do, in a lot of respects. Just having family and children can do that, but yeah, I mean, the devices that we have do that, and frankly, just all of the devices that most motor vehicles are equipped with now that I didn't have when I was growing up or when I was starting to drive in high school. The most distracting thing I would have had that was in the vehicle would have been the radio or the tape player, with me trying to skim through wind the tape player the next song I wanted to hear. But yeah, Steve's right. It's just human nature. That's just the way we are. We have a false sense of security about ourselves. We don't think we don't think it can happen to us. We don't think, we think we can get away with, taking our hands off the steering wheel for a minute or something to open up some, the hamburger package that I just picked up the drive-through, or to go ahead and put some makeup on or something like that. All those things are because we are just, as human beings, I think, tend to be rather self-absorbed a lot of times and not taking into consideration the risk that we're taking.
And what he said, what Jimmy said about the false sense of security, we forget, if we're going 50 miles per hour, even in a tiny little car, the amount of force easily kill not just one person, a whole group of people. And just like that, in a blink of an eye. So we just saw just this last weekend, you had the Pride Parade, I think in the Northeast US, where a member of the men's chorus team, not sure what happened, but he killed his own people, like his own member of the choir. Not sure if he's trying to catch up to him and getting out to go march or whatever, but clearly that person had no intention of causing a crash, let alone killing somebody. And we just forget the amount of power we have in our hands when we turn over the key in the ignition and we are driving basically a tank, basically a weapon of mass destruction, if you will. I mean, you could do a lot of damage, and then you're changing people's lives, not just, the victim, but then your own life, forever. And it's that false sense of security. That's spot on, and we all forget that. And unfortunately, those that get reminded, it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to touch on one last thing because it can be considered distracted driving, but I want to know if y'all have heard of highway hypnosis, or it's sort of like you're in trance like state. I want to say, like, in simpler terms, it's sort of like when you're in that daydreaming state when you're driving long distances, say like you're on a road trip or something. I want to know, in your eyes of attorneys, lawyers, is it considered distracted driving? Or in the past, have you handled a case similar in nature? Jim?
I have run into that most of the time is on long haul truckers. They are behind the wheel for hours at a time, driving down a highway. You get the tire hum. You've got the wind blowing through. Even if you have the windows up, there's a degree of wind that you can hear, and they're all constant and consistent, and they do induce sleep and can cause people to fall asleep or get, as the common term is hypnotized. And that is a very common problem with commercial truck drivers. But it's not restricted just to them. Anybody driving a motor vehicle on a long distance, that can occur. I've certainly had it happen to me. And the way to try to combat that is to move your eyes around a lot, pay attention, stop not ultimately frequently, but every hour or two, just get up and walk around, things like that. But yes, those can clearly contribute to a collision, because sometimes you get tired and your eyes start closing, but the minute you stop and you get out, you're wide awake again. And so those they can be very dangerous conditions, and something that we all need to be aware of.
Okay. Basically, so we covered drunk driving, we covered impaired driving, and we covered distracted driving. I want to start with Jamie first. Is there anything else you would like to add? Any stories, past cases, comments?
I think we've covered pretty much everything on that. All I would say is, if you are involved in a collision involving one of these types of circumstances, always be sure to get the information that you need, and always feel free to give us a call, because we'll make sure that we hold your hand through the entire process and get everything that we can to assist.
Steve, how about you? Do you have any comments, stories, cases you would like to add on?
Yeah, I think just the biggest thing is smart insurance companies on a DUI, they will call up the victim, try to get a hold of them, and try to make a pretty decent offer. Try to lull them into thinking, hey, you don't need to hire a lawyer. And oh, by the way, I'll give you enough money to take care of your medical bills, even after they have no idea how much their hospital bill is. And so I understand why insurance companies would do that. It's smart for them because oftentimes it works. But I say just the biggest thing is there's no reason why you should not at least consult with a lawyer that's experienced in handling these cases. When I get cases like this, they already have a good offer, or they're saying, hey, yeah, take the policy limits of $30,000. We'll still dig into it. And if we find out that we can't do anything for them, we just give them back the case. We're not going to charge them for that. So, and unfortunately, there are times where there really is just $30,000. My client's medical bills are $100,000. Well, you know what? That's fine. We can still try to get big reductions on the medical bills and try to at least make it so that when they walk away, that they're not still left with anything out of pocket. So oftentimes, we're still able to help out, even if the dollar amount's not as high as we'd like it to be. But the biggest thing is, at least with the Carlson Law Firm, when we take a look at these cases, we don't charge anybody for it. And if we determine that really nothing else we can add to the case, no value we can add, no harm, no foul, give you back the case, not charge you anything, and go on your way. And at least that way, that you did your due diligence and something like this, because the reality is this: insurance companies prey on victims because they know that the victims don't know what they don't know. You don't go to high school for this, you don't go to college for this. You don't know these things. And so that's why, hiring a competent lawyer, competent law firm that can do this proper investigation, and just to make sure all the bases are covered. It's very important.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, that's it for this episode of The Verdict. Be sure to keep coming back for our other episodes in this series all about car collisions, personal injury, and the surrounding topics. If you're listening to this on any podcast platform, be sure to rate us 5 stars or the maximum amount of stars you can. And if you're watching the video version of this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the Carlson Law Firm, leave a like on the video. And if you want to get into more detail about the topics presented in today's episode, check the video description. We'll have links to relevant blogs covering those topics. And also, we're on social media at the Carlson Law Firm. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And also, if you speak Spanish, we have a Facebook page dedicated to news and updates in Spanish at Carlson Abogados. Lastly, if you're looking for an attorney, our bilingual team is here to help. We offer free consultations, and you can reach us at 800-359-5690. We take calls 24/7, and check out carlsonattorneys.com to find a location near you. So until next time, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Steve, for joining me on this episode.